Few philosophers have had more immediate and direct practical impact than John Locke. Within a century of the Second Treatise's publication, its ideas had justified 2 revolutions and helped establish a new form of government that would transform the world. The American Revolution was thoroughly Lockean. When Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he was channeling Locke almost verbatim, substituting pursuit of happiness for Locke's property. When the Declaration argued that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that's pure Locke. When it claimed that when government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, that's Locke's right to revolution applied to King George III. The American constitutional system embodies Lockean principles: government by consent through representatives, separation of powers, constitutional limits on legislative authority, protection of natural rights, including property, religious freedom, and the idea that sovereignty ultimately resides in the people who created the government and can change it. The French Revolution's Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, 1789, similarly reflects Lockean influence. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. The purpose of all political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. The principle of all sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. But Locke's influence extends far beyond these revolutionary moments. He established the conceptual framework for modern liberal democracy: constitutional government, rule of law, separation of powers, protection of individual rights, limited state authority, and popular sovereignty. Contemporary debates about these topics still operate in the intellectual space Locke created. Locke's natural rights theory provided foundation for modern human rights discourse. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights echoes Lockean language about inherent human dignity and inalienable rights. Contemporary human rights advocacy, whatever its philosophical grounding, operates in a conceptual framework shaped by Locke's argument that rights exist prior to government and independently of its recognition. His property theory influenced classical liberal economics and capitalism's theoretical justification. The idea that you own what you create through labor, that property rights deserve protection from government interference, that economic freedom is a fundamental liberty. These are Lockean ideas that shaped modern market economies and debates about economic systems. His separation of church and state influenced modern religious freedom and the secular state. The principle that government has no legitimate authority over private belief, that religious diversity is compatible with civil peace, that individuals have rights of conscience government must respect, these ideas, revolutionary in Locke's time, are now foundational to liberal democracy. Locke's consent theory transformed legitimacy from something based on tradition, conquest, or divine right into something requiring ongoing popular authorization. This made government accountable in new ways and provided theoretical ground for democratic participation, though Locke himself didn't advocate democracy in the modern sense. But Locke's legacy is contested. Critics from the left argue that his emphasis on property rights and his ambiguity about political participation for those without property provided theoretical justification for capitalist inequality and limited franchise. Karl Marx would later attack Locke's labor theory of property, arguing it obscured exploitation of workers whose labor enriches employers.
Critics from communitarian perspectives argue that Locke's individualism, his starting point of isolated individuals in a state of nature making rational contracts, misunderstands human nature as fundamentally social. We're born into communities, shaped by relationships, and our identities are socially constituted, not atomistically individual as Locke suggests. Critics from the right, following Hobbes, argue that Locke's limited government is unstable in practice. By dividing power and making authority disputable, Locke invites the very conflicts he claims to solve. Effective government requires clarity about ultimate authority, which requires concentration rather than division of power. Feminist critics note that Locke's political theory, despite its universalist language about natural rights, functionally excluded women from full political participation. His discussion of property, consent, and political standing implicitly assumes male heads of households as the relevant political actors.
Post-colonial critics observe that Locke's theory of property through labor was used to justify European colonization of the Americas. Native peoples who didn't improve land through agricultural labor were seen as having no property rights Europeans needed to respect. Locke himself invested in colonial ventures and helped draft the Carolina Constitution, which permitted slavery, revealing tensions between his universalist principles and his practical compromises. Despite these criticisms, Locke's influence remains profound. Modern political theory largely consists of footnotes to Locke, either developing his ideas, applying them to new contexts, or arguing against them. Even critics must engage with the conceptual framework he established. The fundamental questions Locke addressed remain central to political life. What makes government legitimate? What rights do individuals possess that government must respect? When does authority become tyranny? What justifies resistance? How do we balance security with liberty, order with freedom, governmental power with individual rights? Locke's answers to these questions, consent, natural rights, constitutional limits, right to revolution, shaped modern political consciousness so thoroughly that they seem obvious to us. But they were revolutionary when proposed, challenged entrenched systems of absolute monarchy and divine right, and required intellectual courage to advocate when doing so could bring charges of treason. Perhaps Locke's deepest legacy is the idea that political power must justify itself to those over whom it's exercised. Government isn't self-justifying, doesn't derive authority from tradition or force, and must earn continued legitimacy by serving the purposes for which it was created. This idea, once radical, has become the foundation of modern democratic theory. The intellectual combat between Hobbes and Locke represents one of political philosophy's defining moments. Both accepted that government must be justified rather than simply assumed. Both employed social contract reasoning, asking why rational individuals would consent to political authority. Both sought to ground political obligation in reason rather than tradition, revelation, or force. But they reached opposite conclusions. For Hobbes, reason demands absolute sovereignty because only unlimited authority can provide security against the state of nature's terrors. For Locke, reason demands limited government because we leave the state of nature's inconveniences, not intolerable horrors, and we needn't surrender everything to obtain improvement. For Hobbes, natural rights don't meaningfully constrain government because rights without enforcement are empty, and the sovereign alone provides enforcement. For Locke, natural rights constrain government because they exist independently of it and provide the standard by which government is judged. For Hobbes, resistance is never justified because even tyranny is preferable to the state of nature. For Locke, resistance is sometimes obligatory because tyranny itself is a form of the state of nature, rule by force without right. Who was correct? History provides ambiguous evidence. The success of constitutional democracies suggests Locke was right that limited government can work. Stable, prosperous societies combine effective government with protection of individual rights, separation of powers with decisive action, popular accountability with institutional stability. This vindicates Locke's claim that we can have security without absolutism. But history also provides Hobbesian moments. Failed states where government collapses into warlordism resembled Hobbes's state of nature far more than Locke's inconvenient pre-political condition. Societies torn by civil war, where competing factions each claim legitimate authority, vindicate Hobbes's insistence on unified sovereignty. Emergency situations where normal constitutional procedures are suspended revealed a continuing appeal of Hobbesian logic about effective power. Perhaps the truth lies between them. We need government strong enough to maintain order, but limited enough to respect rights. We need authority clear enough to prevent paralyzing disputes, but accountable enough to prevent tyranny. We need the state's sword to make covenants effective, but constitutional sheaths to prevent that sword from becoming a tool of oppression.
The tension between Hobbes' security and Locke's liberty, between effective government and limited government, between order and freedom, remains central to contemporary politics. Debates about national security versus civil liberties, emergency powers versus constitutional constraints, effective governments versus popular control are essentially debates between Hobbesian and Lockean values. Locke's great achievement was showing that these values needn't be mutually exclusive. We can construct political systems that provide security while protecting freedom, maintain order while respecting rights, exercise power while remaining accountable. Whether we've fully succeeded remains an open question, but the attempt itself, creating constitutional government that is both effective and limited, is fundamentally Lockean. His theory also revealed genuine dilemmas that subsequent political philosophy must address. How do we judge when government has exceeded its authority if government itself is the judge? How do we base legitimacy on consent when genuine consent is difficult to establish? How do we protect minority rights within majoritarian institutions? How do we balance property rights with broader social goods? These questions don't have easy answers, but Locke helped us see them clearly. Perhaps most importantly, Locke changed how we think about political authority. Before Locke, political philosophy largely asked, what makes a ruler rightful? After Locke, it asked, why should anyone be ruled at all? This shift from justifying particular rulers to justifying government itself, from assuming authority to demanding its justification, transformed political consciousness and made possible the democratic revolutions that reshaped the world. When American colonists declared independence by asserting self-evident truths about natural rights and government by consent, they were speaking Locke's language. When French revolutionaries proclaimed the rights of man and popular sovereignty, they were applying Lockean principles. When contemporary movements for democracy invoke human rights and challenge authoritarian rule, they echo arguments Locke made over 3 centuries ago. The questions Locke addressed about the foundations of legitimate authority, the limits of governmental power, the rights individuals possess, and the conditions that justify resistance remain as urgent today as in 1689.
His answers may need refinement, revision, or replacement, but his questions endure.